Welcome to XI to I. I'm Noel Rappin, and this time we're going to be talking about estimation. This video should take about 6 or 7 minutes unless I get really caught up in the details or something complicated comes up, in which case it might take a little bit longer, but we'll try and keep it under 10, I'm sure. Every project that I've ever worked on that was more larger than just myself involved some sort of process where the developers would try to estimate how long different tasks would take. And I think one question that's a really good place to start is, why do we do this? Like, who is the intended audience for this number? What's the point of it? What makes it valuable? What makes it not valuable? And I think that most of what I'm going to say here is I think broadly applicable to a lot of software projects, but I'm specifically talking about your sort of mid-sized 2 to maybe 8 developer, reasonable time horizon kind of project. I think that we create estimates for the same reason that we do anything on a software project of that size, which is to create value. And you may wonder what it is about an estimate that delivers value, but I think in the context of the larger team dynamic, a good estimate can have a lot of value. A good estimate helps with capacity planning. In other words, it helps the people who are in charge of decision making on the project get a sense of whether they are capable of doing all the things that they hope to do in the time they hope to get it done in, or whether they need to start adjusting the legs of the software triangle, the time, budget, scope, because they have more scope than they can fit in the available time. It also allows for better priority decisions. I believe it's in a project like this, it's the job of the development team to say what the cost of everything is, the job of the project management or business team to say what the value of everything is. And the better that the development team can estimate the cost, the better decisions that the business team can make in terms of the value of various features. Now, most projects of this size tend to estimate either directly in hours, or they use points, which is sort of the agile term for a dimensionless measure of how long a particular feature will take. Sometimes you kind of fudge this with, they'll call it ideal hours, which really is points by another name. I've always wanted to be in a situation to make this even more abstract. I've often lobbied to call them gummy bears on different projects, but I've never actually had anybody take me up on it. What I'm going to argue here over the next minute or two is that while hours seem like a concrete thing, actually the thing that you're measuring with hours is pretty fuzzy, whereas while points seem like kind of a fuzzy concept, the thing that you're measuring with points is actually fairly concrete. Or to look at it another way, how big are these boxes? Well, you can't answer that question. It's a trick question. You can't answer that because I haven't given you a scale. They could be, inches, feet, miles, who knows? It is an unanswerable question. But the related question, which of these boxes is bigger than the others, is answerable. No matter what the unit is, the box on the upper left is still going to be the biggest. The box in the sort of center lower right is going to be the smallest. One of those two boxes, but they're both going to be smaller than the box on the lower left. And I can do that. I can make that determination even without knowing what the scale is. And I can even make a more important determination, which is, can the 3 smaller boxes fit into the big one? Even if I can't eyeball it, I could cut them out and paste them over it like some sort of a tangram. In this case, I think they probably just barely don't fit. But that's an important, that's in some ways the most important thing that we're providing with an estimate. The big box is the time we have, the smaller boxes are the features or the changes that we want to deliver, and can we fit them into the box? So the amount of time that a particular feature or user story is going to take is really made up of 3 different things. There's the complexity of the problem itself, which in some sense it's not quite an objective measure, because I think different people with different expertise might have different insights on how complex it is, but it is sort of intrinsic to the problem itself. And then you have also the ability of the developer or the team that's going to be doing it. If you give me a server setup task, it's going to take me forever because I'm really not great at that. But some other kinds of web development tasks I might do rather quickly. And then it's also a function of the available time. How much time do I have to spend in other meetings? How much time am I going to spend, interviewing people? So the combination of those three things, sort of the inherent complexity of the problem, the ability of the person doing it, and the available time, that's the total time spent. Now, one thing that's interesting about this is that the ability and the available time to some extent are unknowable. We don't know exactly who on the team is going to do this. We don't know exactly how many meetings they might have on Thursday or something like that. But over time, for a team, they are going to tend to be roughly consistent. In other words, the average ability of a person on the team is going to stay more or less the same. And the average amount of time we spend on meetings is going to stay more or less the same. Which leads to kind of the insight that drives Agile projects to use velocity and points as a measure of problem complexity only. Because in that case, we don't really care what the outer boxes are. We only care that they're consistent. And since people tend to be much better at estimating relative complexity, which box is bigger, rather than absolute complexity, as long as we are roughly consistent in that complexity, and as long as we are roughly consistent in the outside factors that affect the estimates, we're going to be fine in terms of capacity planning and in terms of measuring costs, which are the important things. So rather than trying to figure out absolute hours, all we need to do is say this problem is, very simple. It's 1 point. Points being a measure of complexity here. This problem is a little bit more complicated than that. It's 2 points. This problem is way more complicated. It's 4 or 5 points. Actually, in that case, you probably want to split the problem into smaller stories. But we'll get to that in a second. So, estimating in hours really makes the estimates less accurate. You're chasing a false precision here by trying to estimate things that are more random or more unknowable. The resulting number is going to feel more precise, and people are going to give it a certain weight that it doesn't deserve. It's also often the case that a team that's being forced to estimate in hours, often that's a sign that the development team has pressure being put on them to conform their estimate to an already pre-existing goal. Somebody says this has to ship on January 15th, come hell or high water. Then there's going to be a lot of pressure to get estimates in line, especially for a while. And I think a lot of times that is correlated in my experience with teams that are being asked to produce precise estimates in hours. On the other hand, people often pay in hours. So there's often an interface here when you're dealing in a client situation where you're being paid in hours, but you're estimating in points. People often want to know how many hours are in a point. And the answer usually is something along the lines of, I don't know, but we do 10 points a week. Unfortunately, that's not a completely satisfying answer if you expect to be getting paid in hours. But that's something that you need to work out on an individual situation basis. Okay, a couple more quick points to wrap this up. Let's see. Estimates are always wrong. The corollary of that, to my mind, is don't spend a lot of time on them. A person with a reasonable knowledge of the tool and a reasonable knowledge of the domain is not going to improve substantially on their gut instinct as to the complexity level of a problem. That's one reason why points are kind of coarse. We don't really talk about decimals. We usually talk about like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, in part to encourage just quick, coarse estimates. We're taking advantage of the law of large numbers here. Over time, if we estimate enough stories, our mistakes will hopefully average out. On the other hand, there's also the corollary of small numbers, which is that if you have a lot of 1-point stories, it's very easy to blow up your average by having one of them turn out to be a lot more complex than you thought, and it's hard to make that up if all of your stories are 1 or 2 points. So that's something to be aware of when you're dealing with a long-term project and trying to split the project up into very small stories. You also want to estimate as a team when you can. Often somebody will have an insight on some complexity in the problem that other people won't have, and you need to take that seriously. It's usually fine to take the highest estimate out of a group of people, but however you want to do that, consensus or highest often work pretty well. But you can get pretty far just by dividing stories evenly. That's going to get you a lot of the way there if you just get an instinct of how to divide stories into relatively even chunks. That's what I have to say about estimation. That's going to come in at just over 10 minutes, so I guess I misestimated at the top of the video. If you like this, you can go to www.tablexi.com or follow us on Twitter @tablexi. If you want to know more about the things that I do, you can go to noelrappin.com, follow me on Twitter @noelrapp. You can also purchase at noelrappin.com my ebook Master Space and Time with JavaScript, in case that's something you feel like you want to do. And so this has been TableXI, XI to I, and we will see you next time. Thank you.